Welcome back to Beyond the Bottom Line. Today, Paul and I will be continuing our conversation with Dr. Lee Goldman, Dean of Columbia Medical School. And I want to start back with the gift you got from Roy Vagelos. Roy was once head of R&D at Merck, and during his tenure at Merck, he was very famous for investigating a new drug that couldn't possibly turn a profit. He was doing R&D on a drug against river blindness. Research is always questionable. If the drug were successful, there was nobody to sell it to because the people that have river blindness are in the bush in Africa and there's no money there. And yet he pursued that research, eventually became successful. They've treated millions of people now with that drug, and Merck is giving it away free. Could that story repeat itself in today's profit-driven climate?
So short answer is it could. Let me talk briefly about Roy Vagelos, who's been a major benefactor to what's now the Vagelos College of Physicians and Surgeons at Columbia, a good friend and a close colleague of mine during the past now 12 years. But before then, I admired Roy from afar. He was unusual as a CEO of a pharmaceutical company, having come out of academia. He was at the NIH for a number of years. He was chair of the Department of Biochemistry at Washington University in St. Louis. And he was head of research at Merck before becoming CEO. And during his time at Merck, they discovered a number of new drugs, which had tremendous success because they were first in class to treat hypertension, hypercholesterolemia, et cetera. Merck also provided hepatitis B vaccine in China and other parts of the world, way below their costs. Now what we see is a little bit different. We do see pharmaceutical companies providing low-cost drugs for HIV in developing parts of the world. So there's still some degree of this kind of public spirit, if you will, in the pharmaceutical world. It's just that right now we're seeing another side of the for-profit world with a number of predatory pricing problems with many pharmaceuticals.
And do you feel that at the college, at the medical school, at the hospital?
So we don't feel it so directly because physicians generally don't buy and sell medications. So we're not directly in this. We are affected in terms of our medical care if we prescribe things for patients and they can't afford them. The hospital buys a number of pharmaceuticals directly, and they're affected by those prices. I think that the issue of pharmaceutical pricing is complicated because I think there are at least three different components to it. One is what I just referred to as the predatory pricing. A company somehow gets control of a medication which has a unique role. EpiPen. And it raises the price astronomically because it's got a monopoly. A similar example was a medication called colchicine, which is a very low-cost treatment for an acute gout attack. Well, a quirk in the law, as I understand it, was that because it was never approved, because its use went back centuries, the company that took over the manufacturing of colchicine officially applied for FDA approval and then raised the price like 100-fold.
Was that Valiant?
Yes, I believe it was Valiant. But Valiant was the most notorious
Right.
in this arena. This is just robber baron pseudo-capitalism. There's no excuse for this. I would argue there's no role for it. And that component has tarnished the entire industry. Most companies don't do that, but that's been a huge problem.
One of the big explanations, so to speak, for pharmaceutical pricing being higher in the United States than it is elsewhere is that it's necessary to subsidize the development of pharmaceuticals. Both of the examples that we just talked about were companies that didn't develop those pharmaceutical products at all. They bought them,
Right.
and they were
nothing to do with it. So that's category one. Category two, I would say, has to do with the fact that when the Medicare legislation was passed in the 1960s, the federal government was prohibited from negotiating prices for drugs. So we have this enormous federal healthcare system, Medicare, that is not allowed to negotiate prices. We actually have another federal healthcare system, the VA, that is allowed to negotiate prices, and by and large gets prices substantially lower than most of the rest of us can get. So taking the federal government out of the price negotiation business means that it pays whatever the companies think is reasonable or think they can get. This is not true in other countries where one of the requirements for a medication to be approved is commonly a cost effectiveness analysis, which says what is an appropriate price for the drug given its benefit. The more benefit, the relatively more you can charge for it.
So it's an efficacy type standard?
Yes, exactly. In other words, what is the benefit of the drug? What does it cost? Calculate that and say this is a reasonable price.
Not related to the amount invested in
Not
the development.
It has nothing to do with the amount invested in development. Let me get to the third issue here, which is there's some medications that require enormous investment, but the market may be very limited. So it's one thing you say, I want to develop a medication for high blood pressure, and 30% of adults have high blood pressure. I've got an enormous market. Now we're talking about cost and effectiveness or efficacy. It's different if I'm developing a medication for a rare tumor or a rare inherited disease, and the market is very small, and the amount of investment required was substantial. I can't get there based on that sort of calculation. That's a different category. Even there, we could argue whether drug pricing is appropriate, but those are situations, sometimes truly orphan drugs, sometimes not quite so orphan, but still a very small market, where we do want to have that kind of innovation and investment. What would be an example? Medications for cystic fibrosis. The market is not enormous, investment is huge. It may not make sense for companies to have the huge investment that's required. Another good example is a condition called spinal muscular atrophy, another congenital anomaly for which enormous investment has led to discovery of a very innovative treatment. That's one of the most expensive treatments available right now. But if you sort of do the arithmetic and say, what would it take for a company to be willing to make that investment, the simple cost effectiveness calculation may or may not get you there.
And who passes on cost effectiveness? Who makes the determination?
So like any kind of calculation, one could theoretically gerrymander the numbers and make something look better or worse. In much of Europe, there's a requirement for this sort of analysis. There are at least reasonable standards behind it, typically based on large randomized trials which show you the benefit. One of the problems with orphan drugs is that you don't have the same kind of data. So if I say, if I lower your cholesterol level by X, how much benefit will you get? We have enough data from hundreds of thousands of patients who are treated with statins, for example, to do that calculation. If I say we're going to give a medication to a child with spinal muscular atrophy, where we can show they will do somewhat better, maybe even a lot better, but they've only been followed for a year or two or three, and there are not that many of them, we don't have enough data to do that sophisticated analysis. But that requirement alone has led to a substantial difference in the pricing of many medications in the US compared with parts of Europe where this would not be driven by the economics per se. It's one thing to say we're going to have much lower prices in Africa or in other developing parts of the world. Why should medication cost less in Switzerland than the US? That's not because the Swiss can't afford it. It's because the Swiss require this kind of analysis.
But we are basically a market economy. You charge what the market will bear, unless you're in some kind of a crisis situation, post-World War II or something of that nature where you have price controls. In your judgment, are we in a kind of situation where we are forced to abandon the market as the arbiter of what price is?
one of the principles of a market is you have a buyer and a seller. And in medications, you don't exactly, because you've got a seller, but the user is rarely the direct buyer. I have insurance that pays for some of it, but not all of it. I'm left with some of the cost. I can choose not to take the medication, and that's your open market system. If I'm deciding between affording the medication and a dinner for my child, I'll probably choose the latter. So part of the issue here is this is not quite the same as deciding whether to buy a nicer shirt or just something to keep me warm. Here, the issue is not, do I take this medication or some other medication that costs less? It's, can I get the medication at all?
I mean, part of the problem is it's so opaque.
Well,
What actually the drug manufacturer receives when you have the pharmaceutical benefit people involved, the insurance people involved,
you have a whole chain of people, from the manufacturer to the distributors to the pharmacy, et cetera. So this is not the buyer, in this case the patient, is making an informed decision and also has alternatives. So in most of the rest of free economy marketplace, you have other options which do not involve life or death. They involve status. They
you
involve,
can buy a Lexus or a Ford.
right. And it's one of the reasons why other industrialized countries have universal health insurance.
You think this is a product, drug, pharmaceuticals, that the market system just doesn't work?
It can work for part of it. It works better if the buyer, or at least your intermediary, can negotiate prices. And if you've got private insurance, they're doing that. So back to the issue of statins. There are a number of different statins. They're not particularly different than each other. Sometimes you'll find that, gee, my pharmacy benefit used to cover this statin, and I just got told now it's a different statin. Well, it's equivalent. Your outcome should be the same. If you want to stick with the old medication, you have to pay a lot more. Pretty much everybody switches. So that's how benefits managers work these things. That's okay. That's the free market system. That's different than saying, I can't afford any statin.
Will there be, in your judgment, a decline in experimentation of new drugs under a system like this?
I don't think so. I don't think that the...
Because we see now, big pharma taking out ads and talking about the need for an adequate return on their investment in order to invest for new types of
An
drugs.
adequate return on investment is not unreasonable. That's the world we live in. Now we're getting into philosophy. There's no evidence that people stopped making money back when the top marginal income tax rate was 80%.
Right.
There's no evidence that that inhibited industrialists from developing great companies. They still did it. I don't believe that the capitalistic system is that sensitive to those sorts of rates at the margin that people say, gee, if my return is only X rather than 2X, I'm not going to do it. X is still better than nothing. Many of the pharmaceutical companies are based in Europe. They deal with this all the time in Europe. The US is an anomaly.
It's interesting that the government has two parts, one that negotiates and one that doesn't. It's absolutely irrational.
It's irrational. I've written about it. It makes no sense to me. We're not saying here that cost effectiveness means that you're going to lowball. It means that you're looking at saying the government's making investment in the health and welfare of its population, and it should be able to do that in a reasonably rational way, rather than not being able to negotiate at all. Why should we, the public, be paying more for Medicare to buy drugs than private insurance companies are paying or the VA is paying. It makes absolutely no sense.
Do you think if we had this kind of a system, the differential between what, let's say, European countries are paying for drugs and what we're paying here in the United States would narrow?
Well, it may, but what I'm talking about, much of that difference is in the private sector. So in the private sector, we're still paying more than in most other companies. In the public sector with Medicare, we're usually paying it more. Look, I'm all in favor of innovation. I work at an institution where discovery and innovation is at our core, where we educate people not just in today's medicine, but in the future of medicine. We take care of patients today, but we're always looking toward new things. So it'd be hard to find someone more interested in innovation than someone like me. On the other hand, that does not mean that innovation requires extraordinary profits. You have to not only be in the black, but have some degree of margin to invest in innovation. I'm all for that. But I don't think this requires predatory pricing or pricing of things out of proportion to their benefit. But I think one of the problems, and you'll see issues about how we're going to fix this, is that there are these different components. And when I'm talking about category one, if you will, the predatory stuff, that should be outlawed, that should be criminal, people should go to jail. Part two is a rational market-based system where price is linked to true benefit. Part three is that innovative piece, and there we have to have some degree of flexibility, because I don't think we want to be in a world where, gee, I can't be saved or treated if my condition isn't common enough. That would not be good. There we do need to have innovation. But I think we can deal with these different categories in rational ways.
Do you think money is being wasted on Me Too drugs? Lots of R&D to create a Me Too drug. You mentioned statins before. They're not that different.
They're not appreciably different. I think the Me Too drugs were partly driven by the concept that if a market is big enough, and I'm a big pharmaceutical company, how can I not be part of that market? And if I can do a large randomized trial in a group of patients who are somewhat different than were tested before, I can create, at least temporarily, a market niche for my medication, even though it's not very different. It's not my favorite thing. On the other hand, that does, at some level, allow the competition that can deal with some of the pricing issues. If every medication is only produced by one manufacturer, then by definition everyone's got a monopoly. So the Me Too stuff is not terribly appealing on the one hand. On the other hand, some degree of it is probably very important if you're going to have competition. So I'm okay with that.
And do you see price competition among the Me Too drugs?
Oh, sure, absolutely. A different issue is the maneuver to try to extend the patent lifetime by making trivial changes in a medication. That's a different story. That I'm not in favor of. But you'll often see in terms of some of the blockbuster drugs, as they approach the end of their patent protection, companies trying to figure out ways to make a minor tweak, add something to it, to get extended years. That I'm not in favor of.
Paul and I did a lecture on, I think it was Crestor, where they tried to extend it by saying it had application to some children with a rare disease.
One of the other issues that we're going to face is that, and we've seen this already with some medications made in China, is that generics, which we haven't talked about, when the patent expires, are seen as, well, that takes care of all of it. The companies just get really high reimbursement, really high prices during the patent life, and then once it's off patent, it loses the market totally. We're going to see more and more of the companies continuing to be the major suppliers of their medications after the patent has expired because of increasing concerns about the purity or the reliability of generics made in various parts of the world.
Well, there's a new book out on this subject, on that subject. I think it's poison bottle or something like that.
So I think we've seen this in the past with some medications where doctors felt pretty confident that the post-patent product still being made by the primary producer was more reliable than what was otherwise available on the
Yeah.
generic market. That
I mean,
varies from drug to drug.
It seems as though unless you get a few companies producing generics, the price doesn't change very much.
It goes
requires
down,
a number of
right,
people.
Right. It goes down, doesn't change that much. But I think, again, one of the issues here in terms of regulations will be the regulatory issues. And just recently, there was a major issue with impurities in antihypertensive medication coming from China.
Yeah, we went to our drugstore and ordered a drug, and the drugstore said, I really think you should go on the brand name here. We have not had some good results with this drug.
Yeah.
The FDA doesn't approve those?
I'm not an expert in all the generic issues, but in general, the generic has to pass muster in terms of its purity, at least initially. But then some of these issues have occurred later on in mass manufacturing in parts of the world where the oversight may not be quite the same.
Lee, I don't want to let you go without one last topic that Paul and I have not really talked about. That's the opioid crisis. Whose fault is this? We gave this actually as an exam question. Yeah. Manufacturer, distributor, physician, pharmacy. People are dying. Whose problem is this?
What's the old saying? Success has 1,000 parents, failure is an orphan. So here no one wants to take responsibility, but I think the responsibilities are multiple. 20, 25 years ago, there was a lot of research showing that many people were in pain. They were not being prescribed medications that probably could have helped out with the pain. And that doctors were overestimating the risk of addiction and undertreating people who had pain. And the pendulum swung from, tough it out to, well, we've got medications and the risks are small and I can help you. And then I think some of the companies really took advantage of that and really started to promote these medications in ways that were inappropriate, suggesting that the risks of addiction were trivial, not recognizing that much pain is chronic, and that doctors, I think, also were somewhat complicit in more routinely prescribing for patients more medication than they really needed. So it's very common that if you have some sort of procedure, after which there may be some degree of pain, that a doctor may give you 10 days worth of a narcotic rather than a day and saying, call me if you still have pain. So patients would often be given more medication than they needed, might take more medication than they needed, and could then potentially be set up for what became the opioid crisis. I also think, though, that if you look at the places where the opioid crisis has really been dramatic, it's an interesting shift, we talked about this a bit before, from inner city minority populations to rural white populations. And the issues with the rationale probably not that different. These are areas where people have less hope. Life doesn't look as good. The initial medical care they receive may not have been as complete. But what's really striking here is the marked increase in opioid addiction in rural, predominantly white areas where we just didn't see it before.
I have been very critical in the classroom of the drug distributors because they see this.
Yeah.
It's on the computer. They know where it's taking place.
They're supposed to report it to the FDA. There are absolute violations of law here.
Right. Stories I'm sure you've seen of individual towns having enough opioids for everyone to take oxycodone 4 times a day.
Right.
If you go back and look at this crisis, the enormity, it's hard to imagine that people didn't know, and whether it's the manufacturer or the distributor. But again, in some of these areas, the doctors are responsible as well.
Sure.
And clearly, if you look at these places where the crisis is the most severe, there tend to be a relatively small number of doctors who wrote inordinate numbers of prescriptions. So I don't want this to be seen as a knock on the medical profession as a whole.
No.
Although I do say, and I think we're seeing a change here already, in the number of pills people are being given after procedures that are associated with post-operative pain, we're now seeing doctors give much shorter prescriptions than they did 2 or 3 years ago.
The way it should be.
Yeah.
Lee, thank you very, very much. This has been an extraordinary conversation. And to our viewers, if you haven't understood all of the ins and outs of the pharmaceutical industry and the medical industry, you're a lot further along the line than when we started. I hope you'll join us the next time when we have another guest for Beyond the Bottom Line. Thank you.